That's right. And Dr. Sishuwa is joining us on the line. He is a lecturer at the University of Zambia. He's going to shed more light on this particular issue that we have to do with the judgment that we heard on Friday from the Constitutional Court. Dr. Sishuwa, good morning and welcome to RHB.
Good morning and thank you so much for having me.
All right, Doc, you alongside Chapter 1 Foundation petitioned the Constitutional Court over the eligibility of President Edgar Lungu to stand in the August election. What was the basis of your petition?
Well, the basis was really to protect the sanctity and supremacy of the Constitution. As you know, the Constitution contains a clear two-term limit, and we felt that President Edgar Lungu, not as president, but as a candidate for the Patriotic Front, does not qualify to stand for another term of office because he has twice been elected and twice held office. So we wanted to defend the Constitution as per Article 2 of the Constitution, which gives us that right and duty to make sure that no one abrogates it.
All right, so we heard from the courts on Friday. The court ruled that President Edgar Lungu is eligible to stand. What's your reaction to that judgment?
So I've read the abridged judgment, and subject to me reading the final judgment of the court, my position at the moment is that I'm disappointed by the judgment of the Constitutional Court in the matter. I must state that I expected them to give Mr. Lungu a third term. In fact, I would have been shocked if this was not to be so. And my views are based on how consistent the court has been in reaching decisions tending to be more protective of and deferring to the executive interest than those of the ordinary Zambian and the Constitution. So in a sense, it is the court itself that was on trial. But my disappointment stems from two reasons that arise from my reading of the abridged version of the judgment. The first is the failure by the Constitutional Court to proffer a reasoned judgment which would have addressed our full arguments as petitioners on merits. When the court ruled that the petition be heard on its merit, we anticipated that it would engage with the substantive arguments that were raised. Not only did we demonstrate how the issues in the current petition substantially differ from those in the Danny Pule case, but also, and most importantly, why the decision in the Pule case should not have been used to defeat the recent petition. We also raised arguments pointing out how the Pule case is an unfair judgment which created a bad precedent, not least because the material fact on which the judgment is premised was false, and the creation of the supposed neutral arbiter and not the litigants themselves in that case. So there's nothing in the abridged judgment which demonstrates that the court even attempted to address the key arguments. I wait for the full judgment on 30th June, which they said they'll release it, to understand how those 8 judges of the court, in effect, retrospectively applied Articles 1063 and 1066 of the Constitution of Zambia Amendment Act number 2 of 2016 to benefit Mr. Lungu, who did not assume the presidency in 2015 for the first term of his office because he was vice president, or the result of an election he held because the then vice president could not for any reason assume the office of president. But the second reason of my disappointment stems from what I would say the bogus interpretation of the Constitution when they gave Mr. Lungu a third term. The Constitutional Court even went as far as stating in that abridged version that the first term of Mr. Lungu was inherited. But now, that proposition is not supported by the Constitution. We don't talk about inheritance in the Constitution. It's not even supported by the transitional provisions in the Constitution of Zambia Act of 2016. The arguments about inheritance and entitlement themselves, which the court has embraced, were never advanced by Mr. Lungu's lawyers. So the court tendered them, and basically the court argued the case for Mr. Lungu because his lawyers did not address the court on the merits of the petitioner's argument. So where did the judges find the grounds for finding in his favor?
Dr. Sishuwa, I'll ask you to just hold your train of thought. We're just going to go to the headlines at 8, then we continue with our conversation.
No problem. Thank
All
you.
right. It's your hot station, number one for news and entertainment. That's what you're listening to. It's 8 on the DOT. It's time for us to check out the news headlines at 8.
The news headlines every second hour are powered by Hot FM.
Transparency International Zambia has called for deliberate efforts among actors in fight against corruption to publicize contents of the Whistleblowers Act. The Zambia Association of Gynecologists is concerned with the low usage of female condoms across the country. Center for Trade Policy and Development senior researcher on public finance Gabriel Poland says Zambia can overcome its debt crisis by enhancing its economic growth. Israel's new Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has vowed to unite the nation, frayed by 4 elections in 2 years of political stalemate. And hosts Brazil began the defense of their Copa America title with a comfortable victory over COVID-affected Venezuela in the tournament's opening match. Those there are the headlines at 8. We have more coming up at 9.
This is RSB. All right, here we go. Powered by Mobile City.
Your hot station, number one for news and entertainment, what you're listening to. We continue having a conversation with Dr. Sishuwa. Sishuwa was a lecturer at UNZA, and he continues to, we continue our conversation from where we left off, where you were giving us the reaction from, your reaction to the judgment. Can we pick it up from there, Doc?
Yes, thank you. I was making the point that the Constitutional Court made the argument that Mr. Lungu's term was inherited from Mr. Sata. Now, we had an election in 2015. You don't talk about inheritance in the Constitution. But the argument themselves about inheritance and entitlement, which the court relied upon, were never advanced by Mr. Lungu's lawyers. So the court effectively tendered them or argued the case of Mr. Lungu because his lawyers did not address the court on the merits of the petition's argument. So the question I was asking, I'm left to ask is, where did the judges find the ground for finding in his favor? And this is not the first time the court is behaving this way. If you remember, even in the Danipule case, they repressed the petitioner's question with their own question at the end of the matter. So the court is not allowed to do that because they are a neutral arbiter. They cannot advance or proffer any questions or assistance to either parties. But in relation to the current case, the judgment itself uses astonishing language, to say the least. It states at one instance that Mr. Lungu is entitled to contest. You don't use that kind of language. You could say, oh, he's eligible. It's not an entitlement. But what the Constitutional Court has done is to unwittingly amend the Constitution and in effect tell politicians, the executive, legislature, and ordinary Zambians that it's okay to disobey the Constitution. That is treasonable. The Court is not above the Constitution. Its mandate begins and ends with giving effect to the provision of the Constitution. I must emphasize that this was a landmark case which offered us a chance to develop our constitutional jurisprudence. Unfortunately, the outcome constitutes a serious regression in our capacity to strengthen our democratic credentials. It vindicates the continued decline of public confidence in the judiciary, a very key institution. And it also cements the Constitutional Court's position as a court that lacks demonstrable commitment to protecting the Constitution and the rule of law. In fact,
Sishuwa,
I would say that if you allow me to make this point, I would say that the Constitutional Court has become a clear and present danger to the Constitution and democracy and the rule of law in Zambia, because despite being a nascent court, the court has done more damage to Zambia's democracy than the conventional courts that safeguard constitutional order before its founding.
My question was going to be, in as far as constitutional development and jurisprudence is concerned, what do you think this matter does for Zambia?
Sorry, do you mind repeating the question?
In as far as constitutional development and jurisprudence goes, what do you think this matter does for Zambia?
Well, it doesn't develop our constitutional jurisprudence. You see, when a court sits and you have two parties like we had, you had the respondents and you had ourselves, we make arguments, and the other side also, Mr. Lungu's lawyers, they make arguments. The role of the court is to review both arguments and provide a clear and reasoned conclusion to the matter, which even those who lose the case are able to understand and see this is why we have lost the case. We don't have that in this judgment. What is the basis for saying that this is an inheritance? You have to cite the law. We must be able to develop our jurisprudence using reason and logic, which even those who lose the case or those who read the judgment tomorrow, not just in Zambia, judgments are cited everywhere else in the Commonwealth, for example, they should be able to say this is a clear, logical, and reasoned judgment that we can able to use as precedents in future. You can't do that. Even the Danimpola case, which they relied upon, for example, we demonstrated its weaknesses, and the Constitutional Court can help us a lot if they begin to actually provide logical, clear, and reasoned judgments that can develop our jurisprudence. This one, it doesn't. It creates a very terrible precedent going forward, because you start citing these kind of judgments. Tomorrow, somebody else, a president, can cite these to actually advance their own, third term or fourth term limits, for example, saying, oh, the court made a ruling in this matter. That's dangerous.
All right, Dr. Sishuwa, as we bring this to a close, Zambians go to the to vote on August 12th. With everything that has happened on Friday, what message do you have for the Zambians, since President Edgar Lungu will be on the ballot?
Yes, it's up to Zambians to listen to the manifestos of the political parties that are contesting in this election. They should pay attention to the policy appeals which the parties have proposed. They should assess the individual attributes and qualities of leaders who are aspiring for office. In my view, the contest is between maybe the 3 or 4 parties. You have the Patriotic Front led by Mr. Lungu. You have the UPND led by Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. I do think that the Socialist Party led by Dr. Fred Membe and the Democratic Party led by Mr. Hari Kalaba will be some of the parties that are that you would say are in the front queue in terms of actually getting significant traction of the vote. But that's not to rule out other contestants. I think that these will be the main contenders. My advice to Zambians is to pay attention to everyone who is offering themselves leadership, assess, in the case of the PF, their promises against what they have done in the past 5 to 10 years. In the case of the opposition, it's not enough, for example, for Mr. Hichilema or Dr. Fred Membe to say, hey, vote us in because Mr. Lungu and PF have failed. No. Zambians must pay attention to what those opposition are offering, because ultimately it's not enough to vote out a bad leader if you are replacing that leader with somebody who lacks a clear political program about how they intend to develop the country. So my appeal to Zambians is really to pay attention to these policy appeals that parties and leaders are promising, and ensure that they vote for the best leader who they think will meet their aspirations.
Dr. Sishuwa, I would like to thank you very much for speaking to us on RHP this morning.
You're most welcome. Thank you so much.
All right, that's Dr. Sishuwa. Sishuwa is a university lecturer from the University of Zambia who was one of the petitioners in the case to do with the eligibility of President Edgar Lungu, speaking to us on RHP this morning.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, so we make sure we give it to you daily, Monday to Friday. The RHP, powered by Mobile City.
President Edgar Lungu